I sat at the head of the table in my beautiful new dining room, watching my son raise his glass. He looked at his wife and said the words that were supposed to end my independence, to Sylvia, who is moving in here tomorrow. My daughter-in-law didn't just smile. She looked at my home like she had already conquered it. But I didn't cry. I smiled right back, picked up the remote control next to my plate, and pointed it at the television. The video that played next didn't just ruin their appetite. It sent my daughter-in-law running out the front door in shame. But let me tell you from the beginning how I arrived at that moment. How a 64-year-old widow, who they called a wasted asset, ended up setting the perfect trap for her own family. And how a simple security camera destroyed the plans of a woman who thought she could put me in the basement. They say you never really know people until you tell them no. I learned that the hard way, but tonight, looking around my dining room in St. Louis, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't sad. I was ready. I smoothed the fabric of my dress. I had chosen royal blue for tonight. It was my husband Bob's favorite color on me, but that wasn't why I wore it. I wore it because it made me feel strong. It made me feel like the queen of my own castle. And this house, this beautiful cottage I bought with my own money after Bob passed, was my castle. The table was set perfectly. I used the good china, the Lenox set with the gold rim that I've had for 30 years. I polished the silver until it gleamed under the chandelier. I wanted everything to look perfect. I wanted them to see exactly what they were trying to take away from me. My son, James, sat to my right. He looked handsome in his suit, but he couldn't look me in the eye. He kept fidgeting with his napkin, folding and unfolding the corners. He looked nervous. He should be. James has always been a good boy, but he has a weak spot. He wants to please everyone. And unfortunately, the person he wants to please most sat right across from him. Sylvia, my daughter-in-law, was sipping her wine with a look I knew well. It was a look of satisfaction. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the room. Her eyes darted from the crown molding to the hardwood floors, calculating. She looked like a woman who was already mentally redecorating. She looked like she owned the place. "The roast is delicious, Laura," Sylvia said, though she had barely touched it. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You really went all out. It's almost like a farewell dinner." The air in the room went still. I saw James flinch. He cleared his throat loudly, trying to cover up her cruelty. "It's a celebration dinner, Sylvia," I said calmly. My voice didn't shake. "New beginnings." "Exactly," Sylvia beamed, taking another sip of wine. "New beginnings. That's what we're all here for." She kicked James under the table. I saw his shoulder jerk. She was impatient. She wanted it done. They thought this dinner was a formality. They thought I was beaten. Over the last few months, they had worn me down, or so they thought. They had picked apart my confidence, criticized my spending, and told me that a woman of 64 couldn't possibly manage a house like this alone. They told me I was old. They told me I was confused. They told me it was for my own good. And for a while, I let them believe I agreed. I let them believe I was the helpless, lonely widow who just wanted to be taken care of. I took a slow sip of my water. The condensation on the glass was cold against my fingertips. I looked at James. He was my baby. I remembered teaching him to walk. I remembered his first heartbreak. I loved him more than life itself. But tonight, I had to teach him a lesson he would never forget. A lesson about respect. "Mom," James started, his voice a little tight. We should probably do the toast before dessert." "Oh, yes," Sylvia said, sitting up straighter. "Let's make it official." She reached over and squeezed James's hand. It wasn't a gesture of love. It was a signal. "Do it now." James reached for his wine glass. His hand was shaking just a little. The crystal chimed as he picked it up. The sound rang through the silent dining room like a bell. I sat back in my chair. I kept my hands folded in my lap. My fingers brushed against the pendant of my necklace. It was a simple silver locket, but tonight it felt heavy. It was my anchor. "Go on, James," I said softly. He stood up. He looked at the ceiling, then at Sylvia, and finally, for a split second, at me. I saw guilt in his eyes. But guilt wasn't enough to stop him. "Well," James began, forcing a smile that looked painful, "I want to propose a toast. To family. To doing the right thing." Sylvia nodded encouragingly, her eyes wide and greedy. And James continued, his voice gaining a little more false confidence. "To the future. And to the big changes happening tomorrow." He turned his body towards Sylvia. He raised his glass higher. To Sylvia, he said, the words hung in the air. I watched Sylvia's face light up with triumph. She was practically glowing. She opened her mouth to accept her victory. She thought the next words out of his mouth would be about her moving in. She thought the papers in her purse were going to be signed tonight. She thought I was moving to the basement. James took a breath to finish the sentence. "To Sylvia, who is—" I didn't blink. I simply touched my necklace and smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a mother who knows her child has been caught in a lie. James thought he was toasting to his inheritance. Sylvia thought she had won the war. They thought I was just an old woman who was ready to give up. But neither of them knew that I had spent the last 3 weeks planning a very different ending. They didn't know who was sitting in the study just down the hall, waiting for my signal. They didn't know that the changes happening tomorrow were not the ones they expected. James opened his mouth to finish the toast that would ruin my life. But to understand why this moment was going to destroy everything they planned, you have to understand how we got here. You have to understand what they did to me. And you have to understand that there is no dangerous creature on earth quite like a woman who is tired of being pushed around. 3 months earlier, 3 months ago, I did something brave. I bought a house. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a sprawling estate. It was a cottage-style home with 3 bedrooms, a wide front porch, and a garden that needed love. After Bob passed away, living in our old family home felt like living in a museum. Every corner held a memory that hurt too much to look at. I needed a fresh start. I needed a place that was just mine. When the realtor handed me the keys, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from excitement. For the first time in 40 years, I was making a decision purely for myself. I didn't ask James. I didn't ask Sylvia. I used the life insurance money Bob left me, money he wanted me to use to be happy, and I bought my sanctuary. The first week was bliss. I woke up when I wanted. I drank coffee on the porch and watched the sunrise. I spent hours in the backyard pulling up weeds and planting the rose bushes I had always wanted. I felt capable. I felt independent. I was 64, not 94. I could lift a bag of mulch. I could paint a guest room. I was alive. I remember standing in the kitchen that first Saturday, looking out at the yard. The late afternoon sun was hitting the oak tree just right. I felt a peace I hadn't felt since the funeral. I thought to myself, I can do this. I am going to be okay. That feeling lasted exactly until the silver sedan pulled into my driveway. James and Sylvia had come to see the new place. I had invited them for lunch. I spent the morning making a quiche and a fresh salad. I wanted everything to be nice. I wanted them to be proud of me. I wanted James to walk in and say, "Wow, Mom, you did good." I wiped my hands on my apron and went to the front door. I opened it with a smile so big my cheeks hurt. "Welcome," I said, stepping aside to let them in. James walked in first. He looked tired. He gave me a quick peck on the cheek and mumbled, "Hey, Mom." He didn't look around. He just looked at his phone. Then Sylvia walked in. She didn't say hello. She didn't hug me. She stopped right on the doormat and looked up at the ceiling, then down at the floor. It wasn't a look of admiration. It was the look of a building inspector looking for code violations. "So," Sylvia said, dropping her purse on my entry table without asking. This is it. This is it," I said, trying to keep my energy up. "Come on, let me give you the tour. The kitchen has these wonderful big windows." I led them into the kitchen. I was so proud of the light in there. Sylvia walked to the sink and ran a finger along the counter. "Quartz?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "It's durable." "Expensive, though," she muttered. She turned to me, her face perfectly smooth, her expression blank. "How much did this place cost, Laura? The market is so volatile right now. I hope you didn't overpay." My stomach tightened. I was raised in a generation where you didn't ask people, especially your parents, what they paid for things. It was rude. "I got a fair price," I said, keeping my voice light. "And it's worth it. I love the neighborhood." Sylvia walked over to the back door and looked out at my garden, my pride and joy. She frowned. "That's a lot of yard," she said. "Who is going to mow all that? You can't be out there pushing a mower in the heat. It's a heart attack waiting to happen." "I have a gardener coming twice a month for the heavy stuff," I said, though I planned to do most of it myself because I enjoyed it. "And I like the exercise." "Exercise is walking around the block, Laura," Sylvia said, turning back to me. "Not landscaping. Honestly, when James told me you were buying a house, I assumed you meant a condo, or one of those 55-plus communities where they have pull cords in the bathroom." I felt the blood rush to my face. "I don't need a pull cord. Sylvia, I'm 64, not an invalid." James finally looked up from his phone. He sensed the tension. "Sylvia just means this is a lot of responsibility, Mom. We worry." "There's nothing to worry about," I said, trying to catch my sons' eye, looking for the boy I raised. "I'm handling it. I'm happy here." We moved to the living room. I had arranged my furniture to make it cozy. My favorite reading chair was by the fireplace. Sylvia sat on the sofa and bounced a little, testing the springs. "It just seems like a waste," she said casually, as if discussing the weather. "Using all that insurance money on a depreciating asset. You're one person. You have 3 bedrooms. What are you going to do with 3 bedrooms? It's just more dust to clean." "I want space for guests," I said, "for when you 2 visit, or if my sister comes from Ohio." "We live 20 minutes away," Sylvia said flatly. "We don't need to sleep over. And your sister hasn't traveled since her hip surgery." She looked at James. "Tell her, James." I looked at my son. "Tell me what?" James sighed. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. It was a gesture he used when he was uncomfortable or when he was about to deliver bad news at work. "Mom," he started, "the house is nice." "It is. But we're just concerned about the long term. A house requires management. Bills, repairs, taxes, maintenance. It requires you to be sharp 24/7. "I am sharp," I said, feeling a cold knot form in my chest. I know," James said quickly. "But as we age, things slip." Sylvia and I were reading about the stress of homeownership on seniors. It adds to the cognitive load. The room went silent. Cognitive load. The phrase hung in the air like a bad smell. It sounded clinical, cold. It sounded like something you say about a broken computer, not your mother. "My cognitive load is just fine. Thank you," I whispered. "We aren't saying you're losing it, Laura," Sylvia chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We're just saying, why make it harder on yourself? A condo would have been safer, less to think about. We just don't want you to get overwhelmed and make mistakes. You know how you get with numbers sometimes. I stared at her. How I get with numbers. I did the bookkeeping for Bob's business for 30 years. Sylvia! That was a long time ago, she shrugged. Things change. I looked at James, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to say, Sylvia, stop it. Mom is the smartest person I know. But he didn't. He just nodded slowly. She has a point, Mom. We just want to preserve your resources. This house is a big drain. I realized then, standing in my beautiful, sun-filled living room, that they didn't see what I saw. I saw a new beginning. I saw roses blooming in the spring. I saw a place where I could heal. They saw a mistake. They saw an inheritance being spent. They didn't see me as an independent woman. They saw me as a liability. They saw a child they had to manage. Lunch is ready, I said abruptly. I couldn't listen to another word. I walked into the kitchen, my hands trembling again. But this time, it wasn't from excitement. It was from anger. And underneath the anger, a terrible, sinking fear. They weren't happy for me. And looking back, I realized that was the moment the clock started ticking. I just didn't know it yet. I thought this was just a rude visit. I didn't know they were already calculating how to undo everything I had just built. I brought the quiche out to the dining room. I served them. I smiled. I played the part of the gracious hostess. But as I watched Sylvia critique the crust of my pie, I made a silent promise to myself. I was going to keep this house, no matter what they said. But I had no idea how far they were willing to go to take it from me. I always thought that when a thief comes to take everything you own, they come in the middle of the night wearing a mask. I was wrong. Sometimes they come at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday wearing designer heels and carrying a latte. The weeks following that disastrous lunch were quiet, but it was a heavy kind of quiet. I tried to shake off the feeling that I was being watched. I went back to my routine. I joined a book club at the local library. I found a spot in the corner of my living room where the morning sun hit just right, and that became my sanctuary for reading and tea. I was sitting in that exact spot, reading a historical novel and enjoying the silence when I heard the front door unlock. I froze. I hadn't given Sylvia a key. I had given James a key strictly for emergencies, like if I fell down the stairs or didn't answer the phone for 2 days. I certainly didn't give it to him so his wife could treat my home like a public park. The door swung open, and I heard the click-clack of heels on my hardwood floor. Then, a heavier set of footsteps. Boots. See? I told you the layout was open. Sylvia's voice echoed from the hallway. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stood up, clutching my book against my chest like a shield. Hello, James. Sylvia rounded the corner into the living room. She wasn't alone. A man in dirty work boots and a tool belt was standing on my Persian rug. He looked uncomfortable, holding a clipboard and a measuring tape. Oh, you're home, Sylvia said. She didn't say it like a greeting. She said it like an inconvenience. She didn't apologize for barging in. She didn't introduce the man. Of course I'm home, Sylvia. I live here, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Who is this? And why do you have James's key? This is Mike, she said, gesturing vaguely at the contractor. He's a landscape architect. I borrowed the key because James is busy at work, and Mike had an opening in his schedule today. We couldn't miss it. An opening for what? I looked at Mike. I didn't hire a landscape architect. Mike looked at Sylvia, confused. She said the owner requested a quote for a complete pave-over. A what? I felt the blood drain from my face. Come on, Mike, let's go out back, Sylvia said, ignoring me completely. She waved him toward the kitchen door, the door that led to my garden. I followed them, my hands shaking. Sylvia, wait a minute. You cannot just walk in here with a contractor. What are you talking about? She walked right past me, opening the back door and stepping onto the porch. She stood there, hands on her hips, looking out at my yard. My roses were just starting to bud. I had spent days on my knees, working the soil, pruning the dead leaves, nurturing those bushes. They were the first living things I had taken care of since Bob died. They meant everything to me. Sylvia pointed a manicured finger at the center of the yard. All of this, she said to Mike, from the porch to the back fence. It needs to be leveled. We want to put in a concrete patio, maybe a low-maintenance rock garden on the sides. No grass, no bushes. Wait, I said, stepping between them. No, absolutely not. Mike stopped writing on his clipboard. He looked at me, then at Sylvia. Laura, please, Sylvia sighed, rolling her eyes. She turned to Mike. Ignore her hesitation. She's just attached to the idea of a garden. But the reality is, she can't manage it. Look at this. She pointed at a small pile of leaves I hadn't raked up yet. It's already getting away from her. I was going to rake those this evening. I snapped. And I love these roses. I am not pouring concrete over my garden. Sylvia turned to me, and her face changed. She put on that mask again, the one of fake, pitying concern that made me want to scream. She lowered her voice, speaking to me like I was a toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. Oh, Laura, she cooed. Don't get emotional. We aren't doing this to hurt you. We're thinking of your future. Do you really want to be out here in July, sweating and straining your back? What if you slip? What if you get heat stroke? We just want to make the house safe. I am perfectly safe, I said, and this is my house. I make the decisions. It's an investment, Sylvia countered, her voice hardening just a fraction. Paving it increases the property value for the right buyer. A family doesn't want high-maintenance landscaping these days. For the right buyer, I repeated, I am the buyer. I already bought it. I am not selling. Sylvia exchanged a look with the contractor. It was a look that said, she's senile, just humor her. Okay, Mike, Sylvia said briskly. Just draw up the quote for the concrete work and email it to my husband. We'll handle the deposit. Don't you dare. I told Mike, if you step foot on this property again without my direct permission, I will call the police for trespassing. Mike raised his hands in surrender. Look, ladies, I don't want to get in the middle of a family dispute. Call me when you figure it out. He turned and walked back through the house, leaving mud tracks all the way to the front door. When the front door clicked shut, the silence in the backyard was deafening. I turned to Sylvia. I was shaking with rage. Give me the key, I said. No, she said simply. It is my house, Sylvia. Give me the key. It is James's key, she said, smoothing her blazer. And James wants me to have access. He's worried about you, Laura. We both are. This behavior, yelling at contractors, getting hysterical over some old bushes, it's exactly why we need to step in. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. You can't live here alone forever, Laura. You know that. We're just trying to make the transition easier before something happens. She didn't wait for me to respond. She turned on her heel and walked out. She didn't even close the back door behind her. I stood there in the cool afternoon air, staring at my roses. I felt violated. It wasn't just about the garden. It was the way she spoke about me, right in front of my face, as if I were already gone. As if I were just a ghost haunting a property they already owned. I went inside and locked the door. I sat down at my kitchen table and dialed James's number. My hands were trembling so badly I had to hit the call button twice. He answered on the second ring. Hey, Mom, I'm in a meeting. Is everything okay? No, James, everything is not okay, I said, my voice cracking. Your wife just barged into my house with a strange man and told him to pour concrete over my garden. She refused to give me back your key. You need to handle this. I waited for him to get angry. I waited for him to say, she did what? I'll talk to her right now. Instead, I heard a long, heavy sigh on the other end of the line. Mom, James said, sounding exhausted. Sylvia called me. She said you got really aggressive with the contractor. She was just trying to get a quote. You didn't have to embarrass her. Embarrass her? I gripped the phone tighter. James, she came into my home uninvited. She wants to destroy the only thing I enjoy. She treats me like I'm incompetent. She's trying to help Mom. James said. His voice was patronizing now, just like hers. She knows a lot about real estate. She's right, that garden is a liability. If you fall out there, I am not going to fall. I shouted. Why doesn't anyone listen to me? Stop fighting her, Mom. James said sharply. Please. It's causing a lot of stress in my marriage. Sylvia knows what's best. She's just trying to protect the asset. The asset. I whispered. I am your mother, James, not an asset manager. Look, James said, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. Since we're talking about it, Sylvia and I have been looking at the tax implications of you owning that place outright. The inheritance tax is going to be a nightmare if something happens to you. I went cold. What are you saying? It's complicated, he said, rushing through the words. But we think it would be smarter strictly for tax purposes, Mom, if you sign the deed over to us now. We'd let you live there for the rest of your life, obviously. But on paper, it would be ours. It protects the house. It protects you. I held the phone away from my ear for a second, staring at it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You want me to sign my house over to you? I asked slowly. It's just paperwork, Mom, he said casually. It doesn't change anything for you. It just secures the future. Sylvia has a lawyer drawing up the papers. We can bring them over on Friday. I see, I said. My voice was eerily calm now. The anger had evaporated, replaced by a deep, freezing clarity. Just think about it, James said. For me, it would take a huge load off my mind. I'll think about it. I lied. Thanks, Mom. Gotta run. He hung up. I sat in my kitchen as the sun went down, casting long shadows across the floor. The mud from the contractor's boots was still drying on my rug. They didn't just want to pave my garden. They wanted the whole thing. They wanted to own me. James, my sweet boy, had been completely twisted by her. Sign the deed over. It was the oldest trick in the book. I knew plenty of widows who had done it, thinking they were helping their children, only to find themselves evicted or put in a home 6 months later because the owners decided to sell. For tax purposes, he had said. I looked out the window at my rose bushes. They were swaying in the wind, holding their ground. I realized then that crying wasn't going to help. Yelling wasn't going to help. If I wanted to keep my home and my dignity, I had to stop acting like a mother and start acting like a woman who was under attack. James wanted me to sign papers on Friday. Fine. I would sign papers, but they wouldn't be the ones he was expecting. I picked up the phone again. But this time, I didn't call family. I called the one person Sylvia was afraid of. I called my lawyer. People assume that because I have gray hair and use a paper planner, I don't understand technology. They think I'm confused by smartphones and that the internet is a scary place for me. Sylvia certainly thought so. She treated me like I was stuck in the Stone Age. She would explain simple things to me, like how to send a text message or how to use the microwave with that slow, condescending voice she used for children. But she forgot one thing. I'm a widow living alone. And when you live alone, you take precautions. A month after I moved in, I bought a small security camera. It wasn't a high-tech spy gadget. It was just a simple little white cube I picked up at the hardware store. I set it up on top of the refrigerator, nestled behind a ceramic pitcher and a fake ivy plant. I didn't buy it to spy on people. I bought it to watch my dog, Buster, when I was out running errands. I just wanted to make sure he wasn't chewing the baseboards or barking at the mailman. I never told James or Sylvia about it. It wasn't a secret exactly. It just never came up. Why would it? It was just a pet cam. That little camera, costing less than $50, ended up saving my life. It was Wednesday afternoon, 2 days before the celebration dinner, where James wanted me to sign the papers. I was at the grocery store, standing in the produce aisle, picking out apples for a pie. I wanted to make everything perfect for Friday. Even though I had already spoken to my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, and we had a plan in motion, a small part of me, the mother part, still hoped I was wrong. I hoped that maybe I was just being paranoid. I hoped that if I made them a beautiful dinner, they would remember that we were a family, not a business arrangement. I was weighing a bag of Granny Smith apples when my phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out. A notification popped up on the screen. Motion detected, kitchen. I smiled. I thought, Buster must have jumped up on the counter to look for crumbs. I put on my reading glasses and tapped the notification to open the app, expecting to see my golden retriever's guilty face. The video feed loaded. The picture was crisp and clear. It wasn't Buster. Standing in the middle of my kitchen, clear as day, were James and Sylvia. My blood ran cold. I stood frozen next to a display of bananas, staring at the tiny screen in my hand. They shouldn't be there. I hadn't given them permission to be there. And since Sylvia had refused to give back the key, they had let themselves in. I turned the volume up on my phone and held it up to my ear, pressing it close so I wouldn't miss a word. It's smaller than I remembered, Sylvia's voice tinny but distinct through the phone speaker. She was opening my cabinets, looking at my dishes. We're going to have to gut this kitchen. These cabinets are dated. Sylvia, stop, James said. He was leaning against the counter, looking down at his shoes. He looked miserable. We haven't even signed the papers yet. Don't start remodeling. The papers are a formality, James, she snapped, closing a cabinet door with a loud bang. You heard her on the phone. She's ready to sign. She's scared. She thinks she can't handle the upkeep. We have her exactly where we want her. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. The apples in my basket suddenly felt heavy. I gripped the handle of the shopping cart to keep my balance. We have her exactly where we want her. I still feel sick about it. James said she loves this house. It's her dream home. It's an asset, James, Sylvia corrected him. And right now, it's a wasting asset. If she keeps spending money on gardens and new furniture, there won't be anything left for us. We have to stop the bleeding. Sylvia walked out of the frame for a second, then came back holding a glass of my orange juice. She drank from it and set it down on the counter without a coaster. So, here is the timeline, Sylvia said, her voice businesslike. Friday night, she signs the Asset Protection Trust. She thinks it just protects the house from taxes and creditors. She doesn't realize the clause we added gives you full power of attorney over the property immediately. I stopped breathing. My lawyer had warned me about this. He said, Laura, be careful. If they slip a power of attorney clause into a trust document, they can evict you the next day. I hadn't wanted to believe him, but there it was. Okay, James said quietly. But where does she go? We can't just kick her out. Sylvia. She's my mother. Sylvia sighed, the sound of long-suffering impatience. We aren't kicking her out, James. Stop being so dramatic. We're moving her. To where? To the downstairs suite, Sylvia said. The basement, James asked, his voice rising a little. James, it's a finished basement, Sylvia argued. It has a bathroom. It has a little kitchenette. It's perfect for her. It's cozy. She doesn't need to be climbing stairs at her age anyway. And what about the upstairs? James asked. Well, obviously we take the master, Sylvia said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. I want the master bedroom. The light is better. We can turn her sewing room into your office, and the guest room can be a gym. I stared at the screen, horrified. The basement, my beautiful house, my sanctuary, and she wanted to shove me into the basement like an old piece of furniture she didn't know what to do with. She wanted my bedroom. She wanted my sewing room. She wanted my life. She is going to be heartbroken, James said. His voice was barely a whisper. I waited. I prayed. Please, James. Please say no. Please tell her that you won't do this to me. She'll get over it, Sylvia said coldly. She's old, James. Old people adapt. Or they forget. Either way, she doesn't need a house this big. It's wasted on her. She's one person. We are a family. We have a future. She just has memories. James was silent for a long time. On the screen, I watched him rub his face with his hands. Okay, he said finally. Okay, but we wait until after the ink is dry on Friday before we tell her she has to move downstairs. I can't do it before then. Fine, Sylvia agreed. Friday night, we toast to the new arrangement. Saturday morning, we start moving her boxes downstairs. I turned off the phone. I stood in the middle of the grocery store, surrounded by strangers pushing carts, checking lists, living their normal lives. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. My own son, the boy I had nursed through fevers, the boy I had cheered for at soccer games, the boy I had helped with his college tuition. He had just agreed to put me in the basement. He had agreed that I was wasted space. For a moment, I thought I was going to cry. I felt the tears prickling behind my eyes. I felt that overwhelming sadness of a mother who realizes she has failed to raise a good man. But then something strange happened. The tears didn't fall. The sadness evaporated. In its place, a cold, hard block of ice settled in my chest. She's old. She'll get over it. That's what Sylvia thought. She thought I was feeble. She thought I was past my prime. She thought I was just an obstacle to be moved aside, so she could take what she wanted. I took a deep breath. I looked down at the apples in my cart. I wasn't going to cry. Crying was for victims. Crying was for the old Laura, the one who just wanted everyone to get along. The new Laura? The new Laura was angry. I put the phone back in my purse. I adjusted my glasses. I looked at my shopping list. Roast beef, potatoes, red wine. I was still going to cook that dinner. I was still going to host that party. But it wasn't going to be a celebration for them. It was going to be an execution. I pushed my cart forward. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My grip was firm. They wanted a show on Friday. I would give them a show. They wanted the house. They were going to find out exactly who this house belonged to. I finished my shopping with a clear head. I bought the most expensive cut of meat they had. I bought a bottle of very nice champagne because on Friday I was going to have something to celebrate. Silent revenge isn't about screaming. It isn't about making a scene. It's about letting your enemies think they have won right up until the moment the trap snaps shut. Sylvia and James thought they were the predators in my kitchen. They didn't realize they were the prey. I paid for my groceries, walked to my car, and drove home. When I walked into the kitchen, they were gone. The only sign they had been there was the empty glass on the counter. I picked it up. I didn't wash it. I put it in a plastic bag and sealed it. Then I called Mr. Henderson. It's Laura, I said when he answered. You were right. They want to move me to the basement. I'm ready to sign the papers you drafted. The real ones. I hung up the phone and looked around my kitchen. My beautiful, sunny kitchen. Get comfortable. Sylvia, I whispered to the empty room, because you aren't going to be here long. The hardest part of revenge isn't the planning. It isn't even the execution. The hardest part is the acting. It's looking into the eyes of the people who betrayed you and smiling like you don't know a thing. After I hung up with my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, I stood in my kitchen for a long time. I practiced my face in the reflection of the oven door. I practiced looking tired. I practiced looking defeated. I let my shoulders slump. I took off my favorite lipstick. I needed to look like a woman who had given up. If Sylvia and James suspected for even 1 second that I had a backbone left, they would have rushed over with emergency paperwork or tried to declare me incompetent right then and there. I needed them to feel safe. I needed them to feel victorious. Because when people feel victorious, they get sloppy. I waited until that evening to call Sylvia. I knew she would be the one driving this train. I sat in my armchair, took a deep breath, and dialed her number. "Hello," she answered on the first ring. Her voice was sharp, impatient. "Sylvia," I said, letting my voice crack just a little. "It's Laura." "Oh, hi, Laura," she said. Her tone shifted instantly to that fake, sugary concern. "Is everything okay? You sound exhausted." "I am," I sighed. "I've been thinking about what you said. About the house. About the garden. About everything." I paused. I let the silence stretch out. I could practically hear her holding her breath on the other end. "And," she pushed, "and I think you're right. I lied." The words tasted like ash in my mouth. "I think I bit off more than I can chew. I'm 64. I shouldn't be worrying about roof repairs and landscaping. I'm just tired. Sylvia." "Oh, Laura." Sylvia exhaled, and I could hear the triumph in her voice. "I am so relieved you finally see it. We just want you to rest. We want you to be safe." "I know," I said. "I know you're just thinking of me. So let's do it. Let's sign the papers." "That is wonderful news," she said. She was talking faster now, excited. "I'll have James bring the paperwork over tomorrow morning." "No," I said, "not tomorrow morning." "Why not?" Her suspicion flared up instantly. "I want to do it properly," I said. "I want to have one last nice dinner here. A celebration. For the transition. Bring the papers on Friday night. We'll have a roast. We'll drink wine. And I'll sign everything over to James then." Sylvia hesitated. She wanted that signature now, but she also wanted to be the gracious winner. She wanted the victory lap. "Friday night," she agreed. "That sounds lovely. A handover celebration." "Yes," I said. "A handover." She didn't know I was handing over something very different than she expected. The next morning, Thursday, I woke up with a kind of energy I hadn't felt in 20 years. It was a cold, sharp energy. James called me on his way to work. "Mom, Sylvia told me," he said. He sounded relieved, but there was still that note of guilt in his voice. "Are you sure you really want to do this?" "I'm sure, James." I said, "I just want peace." "You'll love the setup downstairs," he said, trying to sell it to himself as much as to me. "We'll make it really cozy for you." "I'm sure you will," I said. "I'm going to spend the day packing up some things. Getting ready." "Do you need help?" he asked. "No," I said firmly. "I want to do this part alone." I hung up. I wasn't packing. I wasn't putting a single book in a box. Instead, I put on my best business suit, a navy blue one I hadn't worn since Bob's funeral, and drove to downtown St. Louis. I parked in front of a brick building on 4th Street. Henderson and Associates. Mr. Henderson had been Bob's lawyer for 30 years. He was a man who still wore suspenders and didn't trust emails. He trusted ink. When I walked into his office, he didn't offer me coffee. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "You're sure about this, Laura?" he asked. "This is the nuclear option. Once we file this, there is no going back. It will burn bridges." "Mr. Henderson," I said, sitting down and smoothing my skirt. "They measured my windows for drapes while I was still living there. They planned to put me in the basement. The bridge is already burned. I'm just sweeping up the ashes." He nodded grimly. "All right then." He slid a thick stack of documents across the mahogany desk. "This is the irrevocable trust," he explained, tapping the paper. "We are moving the title of the house out of your name and into the Laura Swartz Living Trust. You are the sole trustee and the sole beneficiary for your lifetime. That means you control it. You live in it, but legally you don't own it in a way that allows you to sign it away to James." He flipped the page. "Even if they bullied you into signing a deed on Friday night," he continued, "it would be worthless. You can't give away what the trust owns. And since the trust is irrevocable, you can't change it without a court order. It protects you from them. And frankly, it protects you from yourself if you ever get soft-hearted." "I won't get soft-hearted," I said, taking the pen. "And this," he said, sliding a second, thinner document across the table, "is the trespass notice and the revocation of permission." I looked at the document. It was simple. It stated that James and Sylvia were no longer welcome on the property and that any previous keys or permissions were null and void. "And the third thing?" I asked. Mr. Henderson smiled, a dry, thin smile. "The eviction protection. If they try to claim residency because they've left a toothbrush there or something, this shuts it down. They have never lived there. They have no rights." I signed my name. Laura Swartz. The pen scratched loudly in the quiet office. With every loop of my signature, I felt lighter. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a woman conducting business. "One last thing, Mr. Henderson," I said, capping the pen. "I need you to come to dinner tomorrow." He raised an eyebrow. "I don't usually attend social functions, Laura." "It's not a social function," I said. "It's a closing, and I need a witness. I want you to wait in the study. When I give the signal, when I play the video, I want you to come out." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll be there. 7 p.m. I drove home, feeling like I was floating. I stopped at the market and bought the most beautiful bouquet of flowers I could find. Not for Sylvia. For me. When I got home, I did something petty. I walked down to the basement. It was a finished basement, yes, but it was dark. It smelled like damp concrete and old carpet. There were 2 small windows up high that let in a sliver of gray light. I stood in the middle of the room and imagined my life there. I imagined sleeping down here while Sylvia walked around on my hardwood floors upstairs. I imagined hearing their footsteps above my head every day, reminding me that I was beneath them, literally and figuratively. "No," I whispered to the empty room. "Never." I went back upstairs and locked the basement door. Friday arrived with a gray, overcast sky. It matched the mood perfectly. I spent the day cooking. I roasted a prime rib with rosemary and garlic. I mashed potatoes with heavy cream and butter. I glazed carrots with honey. The house smelled rich and welcoming. At 6 p.m., I set the table. 3 places. At 6:30 p.m., Mr. Henderson arrived. He came to the back door, as we had discussed. He was wearing his gray suit and carrying his briefcase. "You look nice, Laura," he said. "I feel nice," I replied. "You can wait in the study. It's just off the dining room. You'll hear everything." "Good luck," he said, and closed the study door. I was alone again. I lit the candles. I poured myself a glass of water. At 6:55 p.m., headlights swept across the front window. They were here. I watched through the curtains. James was driving. Sylvia was in the passenger seat. She was checking her makeup in the visor mirror. She looked excited. She looked like a shark smelling blood in the water. They got out of the car. James was carrying a bottle of wine. Sylvia was carrying a thick manila folder. The papers. I opened the front door before they could knock. I put on the face I had practiced, the tired, grateful mother. "Come in," I said softly. "I'm so glad you're here." Sylvia stepped inside, hugging the folder to her chest. She looked around the hallway, her eyes already measuring for new paint, maybe a new runner rug. "It smells delicious, Laura," she said. "I'm glad we could do this. It's going to be a great relief for you." "Yes," I said, leading them to the dining room. "A great relief." James looked at me. "Are you okay, Mom?" "I am, James," I said, and for the first time in days I was telling the truth. "I'm really okay." We sat down. The trap was set. The bait was taken. And the door to the study was cracked open just an inch, enough for justice to slip through, when the time was right. "Let's eat first," Sylvia said, placing the folder on the table right next to her plate. "Business after pleasure." "Agreed," I said. I served the roast. I watched them eat my food. I watched them drink my wine. I watched them smile at each other, thinking they were minutes away from owning my life. And I smiled back, because I knew something they didn't. I knew that this was their last meal in my house. The roast beef was gone. The wine bottle was half empty, and the silence in the room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. We had made small talk for 45 minutes. We talked about the weather. We talked about James's job. We talked about everything except the elephant in the room, the thick manila folder sitting right next to Sylvia's elbow. She had touched it at least 10 times during the meal, tapping her fingernails on it like a drummer waiting for the beat to drop. She was impatient. She wanted the deed done. I wiped my mouth with my napkin and placed it neatly on the table. "Well," Sylvia said, her voice bright and sharp. "That was wonderful, Laura. Really. But I think it's time we get to the main event, don't you?" She nudged James. "Honey, the toast. This brings us back to the moment where we started, the moment everything changed." James stood up. He looked pale. The wine hadn't relaxed him. It had just made him sweat. He picked up his glass, his hand trembling slightly. He looked at Sylvia, who was beaming up at him, with eyes full of greed. Then he looked at me. "Right," James cleared his throat. "A toast." He took a breath, trying to steady himself. "To the future," he began, reciting the lines Sylvia had probably fed him in the car. "To doing what's best for the family. And—" he paused, lifting his glass higher. "To Sylvia, who is moving in here tomorrow to manage the estate." Sylvia's smile stretched wide. She reached for the folder, ready to slide it across the table for my signature. She opened her mouth to say, "Cheers." But I didn't pick up my glass. I stood up. My legs felt strong. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm. I looked my son in the eye. "Actually, James," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a razor, "there is a typo in your toast." James blinked, confused. "What?" "You got the location wrong," I said calmly. "And you definitely got the person wrong." Sylvia frowned, her hand freezing on the folder. "Laura, what are you talking about?" "Sit down. You're confused." "I have never been less confused in my life, Sylvia." I reached for the remote control that I had placed next to my water glass. I pointed it at the 60-inch television mounted on the wall behind James, the television they had claimed was too modern for me to figure out. "I think we should watch a little home movie before we sign anything," I said. I pressed the button. The screen flickered to life. The audio was loud. "She's going to be heartbroken." James's voice filled the dining room. On the screen, the image was grainy but unmistakable. It was James standing in my kitchen 3 days ago. James froze. He spun around to look at the TV. Sylvia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She'll get over it. Sylvia's voice boomed from the speakers. She's old, James. She doesn't need a house this big. It's wasted on her. I watched their faces as they watched themselves. Sylvia went pale, her skin turning the color of old dough. James looked like he was going to be sick. The video continued. We move her into the in-law suite in the basement. I want the master bedroom. And what about the upstairs? We take the master. She doesn't need to be climbing stairs at her age anyway. I let it play until the end. I let them hear every cruel word. I let them hear Sylvia call me a wasted asset. I let them hear James agree to put his own mother in a cellar. Then I turned off the TV. The silence that followed was different than before. It wasn't awkward. It was terrified. Where? Sylvia stammered, her voice shaking. Where did you get that? From the camera on top of the refrigerator. I said, the one you didn't notice because you were too busy measuring my cabinets for your new kitchen. You were spying on us. Sylvia shouted, finding her voice. She stood up, knocking her chair back. That is illegal. You can't record us without our consent. In my own house. I asked, raising an eyebrow. In the house you broke into using a key I never gave you? I think you'll find the law is on my side. Sylvia. James sank back into his chair. He put his head in his hands. Mom, You were going to put me in the basement, James, I said softly. I didn't yell. The hurt was too deep for yelling. I changed your diapers. I paid for your college. I held you when you cried over your first girlfriend. And you were going to put me in the basement like a broken lawnmower. It wasn't like that, James whispered, his voice cracking. We wanted you safe. Don't lie to me. I snapped. I just watched you plot to steal my bedroom. That isn't safety. That is theft. Sylvia grabbed the manila folder. Her eyes were wild. She was losing control, and she knew it. Fine, she spat. Fine. We talked about it. So what? It doesn't change the facts. Laura, you are old. You can't manage this place. And you did agree to sign the papers tonight. She slammed the folder down on the table. Sign them, she demanded. We're doing this for your own good. Sign the deed, transfer. I looked at the folder. Then I looked at her. I started to laugh. It was a dry, humorless laugh. Oh, Sylvia, I said, I did sign papers today. You're right about that. I reached into my purse, which was sitting on the floor by my feet. I pulled out the thick envelope Mr. Henderson had given me, but I didn't sign yours. I tossed the envelope onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud right on top of her manila folder. What is this? Sylvia asked, staring at it like it was a bomb. Open it, I said. She ripped it open. Her eyes scanned the first page. I saw her jaw drop. A trust, she whispered. An irrevocable trust. That's right, I said. As of this morning, I no longer personally own this house. The Laura Swartz Living Trust owns it, and I am the only trustee. That means I cannot give it to you, James. Even if I wanted to, even if you bullied me, even if you forged my signature, the house is locked up tight. You can't do that, Sylvia sputtered. We're your heirs. Not anymore, I said. The trust dictates what happens to the property. And right now, the trust says that I live here until the day I die. And after that, it gets sold, and the money goes to charity. James looked up, his eyes wide. Mom, you disinherited us. You disinherited yourselves when you decided I was a burden instead of a mother, I said. Sylvia threw the papers down. This is insane. You're not of sound mind. I'll challenge this. I'll get a doctor to testify that you're senile. I wouldn't do that if I were you, a deep voice said from behind me. Sylvia and James both jumped. The door to the study opened. Mr. Henderson stepped out. He adjusted his tie and walked into the dining room. He looked at Sylvia with the kind of disdain usually reserved for cockroaches. Who are you? Sylvia demanded. I am Mrs. Swartz's attorney, Mr. Henderson said calmly. And I can assure you, she is of perfectly sound mind. I witnessed the signing of the trust documents myself this morning. I also have the video recording of our meeting where she clearly articulates her wishes. Any judge who sees that, and then sees the video of you plotting to evict her, will laugh your case out of court. Sylvia looked at the lawyer, then at the papers, then at me. She realized the walls were closing in. James, do something, she shrieked. James didn't move. He was staring at the second document I had pulled out of the envelope. It was a single sheet of paper with bold text at the top. What is that? James asked, pointing to the paper in my hand. This, I said, is a notice of trespass. I slid it across the table. It says that you, Sylvia Swartz, and you, James Swartz, are no longer welcome on this property. It says that if you return here without my express written invitation, you will be arrested. Arrested? James choked out. Mom, I'm your son. And she is the homeowner, Mr. Henderson interjected. The law is very clear. I looked at Sylvia. The smugness was gone. The arrogance was gone. She looked small. She looked defeated. You wanted to manage the estate, Sylvia? I asked. Well, here is your first management decision. You can leave voluntarily, right now, or I can call the police and have them escort you out. Which do you prefer? Sylvia grabbed her purse. Her face was red with humiliation. She turned to James. We are leaving, she hissed. She marched to the front door without looking back. James stood up slowly. He looked at me, his eyes filling with tears. Mom, I didn't know you felt this way. I didn't feel this way, James, I said, my voice finally shaking just a little. You made me feel this way. You chose her greed over my dignity. Now go. He opened his mouth to speak, but Mr. Henderson took a step forward. James closed his mouth. He turned and followed his wife. I heard the front door open, but I wasn't done yet. Wait, I called out. They stopped in the doorway. James turned around, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Maybe he thought I was going to forgive him. Maybe he thought I was going to back down. James, I said, you forgot your toast. He looked confused. I picked up my wine glass. I walked over to the door. I looked at Sylvia, who was shivering in the night air. You toasted to Sylvia moving in, I said, but I have a better one. I raised my glass. To my son and his wife, I said, my voice ringing out into the street, who are moving out of my life until you learn what the word respect means. I took a sip of wine. It tasted sweet. Get off my porch, I said, and then I closed the door in their faces. I closed the door, but I didn't lock it immediately. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, listening. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally standing up for myself. I expected silence. I expected the sound of an engine starting and tires rolling away. Instead, I heard screaming. You idiot! Sylvia's voice shrieked from the other side of the door. It was muffled, but the rage came through clearly. You just stood there. You let her humiliate us. You let her steal my house. Her house, Sylvia, James's voice replied. He sounded shell-shocked. It's her house. It was supposed to be our portfolio, she screamed. I heard the sound of a purse hitting the siding of the house. Do you know how much time I spent planning the renovation? You know what I told the contractor? You have to fix this, James. Go back in there. Break down the door if you have to. Tell her she's confused. Tell her we'll sue. I pulled back from the door. I looked at Mr. Henderson. He was standing in the hallway, adjusting his glasses, looking ready to dial 911. "Do you want me to call the police, Laura?" he asked quietly. "Not yet," I said. "I want to hear this." I needed to hear it. And more importantly, I needed James to hear it. For years, he had been deaf to her greed. He had excused her behavior as stress or ambition. But now, standing on my front porch in the cold, stripped of her prize, Sylvia was showing her true face. "I can't go back in there, Sylvia," James said, his voice rising. "Did you see the video? Did you hear what you said? You called my mother a wasted asset. You were going to put her in the basement." "So what?" Sylvia snapped. "It makes financial sense. Why are you being so soft? She's one old woman. We have a future to build. We have retirement to think about. Who cares if she sleeps in the basement? She's lucky we were going to let her live here at all." There was a silence on the porch. A long, heavy silence. "She's my mother," James said. His voice sounded different now. The fear was gone, replaced by a dark, heavy realization. "She isn't an asset. She's the woman who raised me. And you wanted to bury her." "Oh, grow up, James," Sylvia yelled. "Stop being a mama's boy. We are partners. We are a team. Now, pick up the phone and call a competency lawyer. We are going to challenge that trust. We are going to declare her unfit." I had heard enough. I unlocked the deadbolt. The click was loud. I threw the door open. Sylvia spun around, her face twisted in an ugly snarl. James was standing by the railing, looking at his wife like he had never seen her before. "You aren't calling anyone," I said, stepping out onto the porch. Mr. Henderson stepped out behind me, a silent sentinel in his gray suit. Sylvia's face changed instantly. The snarl vanished, replaced by a desperate, frantic smile. It was terrifying how fast she could switch masks. "Laura," she gasped, taking a step toward me. "Oh, thank God. Look, emotions were running high. I didn't mean any of that. The video, I was just venting. You know how stress gets to me. I love you, Laura. We just want what's best for you." She reached out a hand, trying to touch my arm. "Don't," I said. I didn't yell. I didn't have to. My voice was cold steel. "Do not touch me." Sylvia froze. She looked at James. "James, tell her. Tell her I was joking. Tell her we're family." James looked at me. He looked at the tears standing in my eyes, tears of anger, not sadness. Then he looked at Sylvia. He looked at her manicured hands reaching for me. He looked at the wild desperation in her eyes. He finally saw it. He saw the greed. He saw the cruelty. He saw that she didn't love him, and she certainly didn't love me. She loved what we could give her. She loved the portfolio. James began to laugh. It was a dry, broken sound. "Joking?" James asked. He shook his head. "You weren't joking, Sylvia. You were measuring the windows." "James, stop it," Sylvia hissed, her eyes darting between me and the lawyer. "We need to present a united front." "There is no united front," James said. He reached into his pocket. I thought he was reaching for his car keys. Instead, he pulled out the key to my house, the one Sylvia had refused to give back, the one she had probably slipped into his pocket before dinner. He walked over to me and placed the key in my hand. His fingers were cold. "I am so sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I am so sorry." "I know you are," I said, closing my fingers over the key. "But sorry doesn't fix this, James. You let her in. You let her talk about me like I was a piece of furniture. You agreed to put me in the dark." "I know," he said, tears spilling over his cheeks. "I was weak. I thought if I gave her what she wanted, she would finally be happy. I thought she was doing it for us." He turned slowly to face Sylvia. Sylvia was trembling now. She sensed the shift. The ground was crumbling under her feet. James, let's just go home, she said, her voice wavering. We'll talk about this at the condo. We'll figure out a new plan. No, James said. He looked at her, and his posture straightened. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. We aren't going to the condo, and we aren't figuring out a plan. What are you talking about? Sylvia demanded. Give me the car keys. You're too emotional to drive. James held up the car keys, but he didn't give them to her. He looked at the woman he had married, the woman who had poisoned his relationship with his mother, and he made a choice. I have a toast, James said, his voice loud and clear in the night air. What? Sylvia blinked. James looked at me, then back at her. Inside, I toasted to you moving in, James said. But Mom was right. There was a typo. He took a step away from Sylvia. Here is the real toast, he said, to my wife, who is moving out tomorrow. Sylvia's jaw dropped. James, you can't mean that. I mean it, James said. I'm done. I'm done with the scheming. I'm done with the greed. And I'm done with you trying to bury my mother before she's even dead. He pressed the unlock button on the car key fob. The lights of his sedan flashed in the driveway. I'm driving to a hotel, James said. You can take an Uber to your sister's. I'll have someone send your things. You can't do this. Sylvia screamed, lunging at him. Everything is in my name, too. You can't kick me out. Watch me, James said. He looked at me one last time. Mom, can I call you tomorrow? I looked at my son. He was broken. He was finally doing the right thing, but he was broken. Part of me, the mother part, wanted to hug him. I wanted to invite him back inside for coffee and tell him it would be okay. But the woman part of me, the woman who had been disrespected and undervalued, knew better. If I took him back now, he wouldn't learn. He needed to feel the weight of what he had almost done. He needed to stand on his own 2 feet without his mother propping him up. No, James, I said. James flinched as if I had slapped him. Mom, you can't call me tomorrow, I said firmly, and you can't come over next week. But I left her, James pleaded. I chose you. You chose me only after I forced your hand. I said, you chose me only after I caught you on tape. That isn't loyalty, James. That's damage control. I stepped back toward the threshold of my home. You both need to leave, I said. Sylvia needs to leave because she is a predator. And you need to leave, James, because you need to figure out who you are when you aren't trying to please a woman who controls you. Mom, please. James stepped toward the porch. I have nowhere to go. Mr. Henderson stepped forward, blocking James's path. Mrs. Swartz asked you to leave. Do not make me call the authorities. James stopped. He looked at the lawyer, then at the closed door of my heart. He realized I meant it. Go, I said. Fix your life, James. Then maybe we can talk in a few months. But not now. I looked at Sylvia. She was standing on the driveway, typing furiously on her phone, probably already calling a divorce lawyer. She didn't look at me. She knew she had lost. Goodbye, I said. I stepped back inside. Mr. Henderson followed me. I closed the heavy oak door. I turned the deadbolt. Click. Then I slid the chain lock into place. Clack. The sound was final. I stood in the hallway, staring at the wood grain of the door. My hands were shaking again, but this time it was from relief. The silence in the house was deep and pure. Are you all right, Laura? Mr. Henderson asked gently. I took a deep breath. I smelled the lingering scent of the roast beef and the faint perfume Sylvia had worn. I said. I turned to him and smiled. It was a real smile. I think I'm going to have a glass of that champagne now. Would you like some? I think, Mr. Henderson said, checking his watch, that under the circumstances, I would love some. I walked into the kitchen, my kitchen, the kitchen that was still mine, the kitchen that would never be gutted for an open concept layout. I didn't have a son to depend on anymore. I didn't have a daughter-in-law to worry about. I was alone. But as I popped the cork on the champagne bottle, listening to the festive pop echo through my quiet, safe house, I realized something important. Being alone is not the same thing as being lonely, and it is certainly better than being surrounded by people who are waiting for you to die. I poured 2 glasses. I handed one to Mr. Henderson. To independence, I said, raising my glass. To independence, he agreed. We drank. And outside, I heard the sound of James's car, finally driving away, taking the toxicity with it, leaving me with my roses, my home, and my peace. Mr. Henderson didn't stay long. He finished his champagne, gave my hand a reassuring squeeze, and told me to call him if I needed anything, even if it was just to change the locks. When I closed the door behind him, the latch clicked into place with a sound that felt like a period at the end of a very long, very bad sentence. I stood in the hallway for a moment, just listening. For months, the silence in this house had frightened me. When the floorboards creaked, I worried about intruders. When the wind howled, I worried about the roof. Sylvia had planted those seeds of fear in my mind. She wanted me to feel small, vulnerable, and alone so that I would run to her for safety. But tonight, the silence wasn't scary. It was heavy, yes, but it was the good kind of heavy. It was the weight of a warm quilt on a winter night. It was the feeling of peace. I walked into the dining room. The table was still a mess. 3 plates with half-eaten roast beef, 3 wine glasses, and right there, in the center of the table, sat the manila folder Sylvia had left behind. I picked it up. It felt heavy in my hands, weighted down with legal jargon and betrayal. I opened it one last time. Asset protection agreement. That's what they called it. Protection. They were going to protect me right out of my own front door. They were going to protect me into a basement suite with no windows. They were going to protect my money into their bank accounts. I didn't read past the first page. I didn't need to. I knew what it said. It said that I was finished. It said that my life was over and it was time for me to step aside and let the young people take over. I walked into the living room. The fire I had lit earlier was dying down, just a bed of glowing orange embers. I picked up the poker and stirred the logs until a small flame licked up the side of the wood. I sat down in my favorite armchair, the one Sylvia said was too bulky for the room. I took a sip of my champagne. Then, I took the papers out of the folder. I fed them to the fire one by one. I watched the power of attorney curl up and turn black. I watched the transfer of deed catch fire, the flames eating away the dotted line where I was supposed to sign my name. I watched the renovation budget turn into ash and float up the chimney. It was a strange feeling. I thought I would feel guilty. Mothers are programmed to feel guilty, aren't we? We are taught that our children's happiness is more important than our own. We are taught to sacrifice, to give until we are empty, to be the soft landing place for everyone else. But as I watched those papers burn, I realized that being a mother doesn't mean being a doormat. It doesn't mean letting your child cannibalize your life just because they are too lazy to build their own. James was a grown man. He was 40 years old. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, I treated him like a man. I held him accountable. I didn't shield him from the consequences of his wife's greed. I didn't smooth it over. I let him feel the cold wind of the world without his mother standing in front of him. Maybe that was the most motherly thing I could have done. I poured myself another glass of wine. I sat there until the fire went out completely. I thought about calling my sister in Ohio, but I decided against it. I didn't want to explain it yet. I didn't want sympathy. I just wanted to sit in my house, my castle, and feel the walls around me. They were strong. And so was I. I went to bed that night and slept better than I had in years. I didn't dream about basements. I didn't dream about nursing homes. I dreamed about my garden. When I woke up the next morning, the sun was pouring through the sheer curtains of my bedroom window, the master bedroom that was still mine. I stretched my arms over my head. My back didn't hurt. My head was clear. I put on my robe and went to the kitchen. I made a pot of coffee, listening to the familiar gurgle of the machine. I poured a cup and walked out the back door. The morning air was crisp and cool. The dew was still wet on the grass. I walked out to my rose bushes. They were beautiful. Deep reds, soft pinks, creamy whites. But they were a little overgrown. There were dead branches that needed to be cut away so the new blooms could breathe. I went to the shed and got my pruning shears. The metal felt cool and solid in my hand. I started to work. Snip! A dead branch fell to the ground. Snip! A withered bloom was removed. It was satisfying work. You have to cut away the dead parts to save the plant. If you leave the rot, it spreads. It infects the healthy parts. It kills the whole thing. I thought about James. I thought about Sylvia. They were the dead weight I had been carrying. I had let them cling to me, draining my energy, blocking my sunlight, because I was afraid of hurting them. But in doing so, I was letting myself wither. Last night, I pruned the garden of my life. I cut them off. It was harsh. It was painful. But looking at my roses now, standing tall and proud in the morning light, I knew it was necessary. James might come back one day. Maybe he would divorce Sylvia. Maybe he would learn to stand on his own 2 feet and come to me with genuine respect in his eyes. If that day came, I would open the door. I would make him coffee, but I would never, ever hand him the keys again. And if he didn't come back, if he chose to stay with her and hate me for what I did, I looked around my yard. I looked at the high fence. I looked at the beautiful patio where I planned to drink my tea. I would be okay. I am Laura Swartz. I am 64 years old. I own my home. I own my life. And I am not going anywhere. I took a deep breath of the fresh morning air, smelling the earth and the flowers. I was the queen of my castle. And for the first time, the castle was safe. Laura had to make a hard choice. She kicked out a greedy daughter-in-law, but she also closed the door on her own son when he had nowhere else to go. Would you have forgiven James immediately after he apologized? Or was Laura right to kick them both out to teach them a lesson? Have you ever had to use tough love on a family member to protect yourself? Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.